Hi all, another 2 weeks and another 2 states. We arrived in Geelong in the evening and headed straight to camp. The next day we headed back to Melbourne to get a few more days with Oscar's family. In this time we went to the Loom to their Connection exhibition. This showed an immersive display of Aboriginal art, floor to ceiling, alongside Aboriginal music. They had art in a few side rooms with immersive and interactive art, which Oscar and his brother enjoyed wholeheartedly, it seemed. They also offered tours of the art, which explained some of the stories behind the art and some of the symbolism. It goes without saying that we love this exhibit and we would definitely go again.
We got more family time with family friends and more good food, good conversation, and some good views more akin to that of our London flat. Most importantly, we got the job of Pingu's first service done, although we did swap to a smaller set of wheels to go and pick him up. Next, because it was a hot day, Holly, Isla and I decided to join Trevor on a trip to the beach. Turns out half of Melbourne had the same idea. Regardless, we ended the day with a wonderful send-off where we got to try a couple of glasses of that Pingu beer that we brewed in our first weeks in Melbourne.
Today was the day we got back on the road, heading as swiftly as we could to Port Augusta to get back on track after our wonderful Tasmanian diversion. Heading out of the busy streets of the city to more rural surroundings. We didn't quite drive the 10 hours in one go, but after 6.5 hours of driving we settled in Tintinara at Lake Indawara for the night. Oscar had a swing next to the lake to stretch his legs after his tremendous stint of driving.
The next day we were back across Murray Bridge, tracing familiar roads, a train and more driving. We stopped for lunch. Holly laughed at a bin sign as we looked at the quote bridge to nowhere, before another drive finally officially reaching Ayers Peninsula with a camp at Lincoln Gap, a short way out of Port Augusta. Now this camp really did feel like the middle of nowhere and we were rewarded with a fantastic sunset that kept getting better and better. And with little light pollution, we enjoyed a beautiful view of the Milky Way.
As I was ill at this point, I was up very early and therefore Oscar was too. Sorry, Oscar. So we made breakfast and got back on the road again. It wasn't long until we were stopped by a road rail vehicle, which we'd been trying to get footage of for a while, so it was a welcome interruption. We planned for this to only be a small day of driving, so after an hour and a half, we got to Kimber, the home of the Big Galah and the Halfway Across Australia sign. Close by was an amazing free/donation camp. However, it was also one of the hottest days we'd had, so we went for a wander for something cold. Oscar transformed, and the sun managed to transform Oscar's water bottle, melting it on the side, so it now has a handy hand grip on the side. That evening, Oscar's keen eyes found a praying mantis and a spider.
The next morning we were back to the barbecue to boil some water for coffee, while Holly chose more books from the rejects of the local library, and then headed into Port Lincoln for another scorcher of a day, so took the opportunity to test out the new snorkels as we swam off the town jetty. As our parking ran out, we hopped back into the car for a short drive to Shelley Beach, where we enjoyed lounging in the shallows with pelicans. After the weather had cooled down a bit, we decided to head into Port Lincoln National Park to find a camp at the ominously named Carcass Campground. But what we found was a lovely sheltered spot behind a dune over which was a beautiful private beach all to ourselves. So we cracked open the beers, got cooking, and did the usual prep for the night before chancing another beautiful star lapse as we settled in for the night.
We'd heard good things about September Beach, so we headed there for a stroll and a clamber along the rocks to look for sea lions on a nearby island. After this, we moved on to Wonnoa Lookout, where you can see dramatic waves, and Wedding Cake Island. We couldn't decide which one looked most like a wedding cake, the one on the left or the right. Oscar wanted more four-wheel driving, so headed to Sleaford Wonnoa Track, where some people were sandboarding, so the dunes could get pretty steep. Luckily, we had reduced the tide pressures and went ahead to tackle the sand hills, and Pingu and Oscar performed admirably. There were some red markers along the route to help guide us along the tracks. However, these were not quite often enough at some points, and we explored more of the national park than we originally intended to. However, Oscar was quickly becoming a pro at dune driving. We did remain cautious and did some investigating before tackling some parts of the drive, and as an added measure, I would go ahead in some more densely bushy areas to make sure there was no oncoming traffic, as the sandhills don't afford great visibility. There were some sections of the drive that were reminiscent of the Little Desert National Park back in Victoria, with toing and froing here and there. We soon got to the more rocky area of the drive and came across emus roaming around. This drive took longer than we anticipated, so we went to Beer Garden Brewing for a late lunch and a celebratory beer.
The next day we pulled on our waders and wandered out to the oyster fields in Coffin Bay for a unique oyster farm tour which saw us floating out amongst the trellises. With some of the largest oysters we'd ever seen in front of us, we got to shucking, which, if you didn't know, involves boring a hole at 3 o'clock and cutting round to 6 before levering open the shell. Add a bit of lemon and there you have it. Fresh as you can get them, straight out the ocean, but to Holly they were still just oysters. After I ended up eating double quantities of oysters for brunch and getting to meet a 9-year-old oyster, we were back in the car as we embarked on a 3-hour 4-wheel drive trek to the camp at the very tip of the peninsula. First obstacle was removing a second unwanted hitchhiker. If you didn't catch him, here it is again. Safe to say, glad that he was on the outside of the car. What followed was some fun sand driving down tracks and along the side of the ocean to a beautifully long white sand beach before arriving at our campground called The Pool, right on the tip of the Coffin Bay Peninsula, on the beachfront before calling it an evening.
Oscar started the day with a run and bees came to us for water. We carefully packed away around them before making our way back out of the park. Along the beautiful 7-mile beach, we noticed something, so pulled over to get a closer look at what we figured was a whale skull, as it was massive. I admired this while Oscar admired Pingu, looking majestic against a stunning backdrop. We hit the sand road with emus crossing just in front of us. We watched their fluffy bums disappear into the shrubbery before continuing to Almonte Beach, which was astonishing, but freezing because of the wind. So sadly, we didn't spend much time here and moved on to Woolshed Cave campsite, which was right next to a rocky coast and, you guessed it, a cave. We marvelled at the cave and surrounding rocks in all forms. We watched the crushing waves and the shy local wildlife. We returned to the car to clean up, just in time for sunset.
We woke up with the birds, continuing our journey north towards the start of the Nullarbor Desert. First stop, however, was the windy town of Streaky Bay, which included a walk along their pier, a visit to a replica of the biggest white shark on record, and a visit to Trevlin Smith Electrical Goods for some cables which had the words "instruments of torture" inlaid into the pavement outside his shop, which hilariously neither him or anyone in the info center knew what that was about. On that note, we left town to the Whistling Rocks and Blowhole, which was somewhat active, although the tide was a little high, and took in more views from Cape Bower Lookout before hopping in the car one final time to head to Point Brown Camp, a lovely spot nestled in the dunes above the beach. While Holly got some rest, I took the time to busy myself with some rock stacking, which admittedly took a little time to get the hang of, but once I'd created a stable base, all that was left was to pile on the weight. As the sun began to set, we took some time to admire my creations. I give you the profile of Fat Man in hoodie and the Stone family Christmas tree.